Picture this. It's 1943, and families are sitting down to dinner plates filled with something called mock goose, which contains zero goose, Woolton Pie named after a government minister, and dessert made from unusual ingredients. Can you imagine opening a cookbook that seriously tells you to fry potato peels and call it a delicacy? During World War II, rationing didn't just limit what people could eat. It created an entire shadow cuisine of fake foods, mystery ingredients, and recipes so bizarre they sound unbelievable today. We're talking about meals that used sawdust as flour, dishes that were challenging to digest, and luxury desserts made from vegetable scraps. Here's the crazy part. People didn't just tolerate these foods, they celebrated them as patriotic masterpieces. Today, we're diving into 20 rationing recipes that were so awful, so unusual, or so different that nobody makes them anymore. And trust me, after you hear about Carrot Fudge and unusual chocolate substitutes, you'll never complain about airplane food again. Number 1. Woolton Pie. Named after the Minister of Food, Lord Walton, this became Britain's most famous wartime dish. But here's what they didn't tell you in those cheerful government ads. This wasn't really a pie at all. It was basically vegetable scraps held together by oatmeal and hope, baked under a crust that could double as roofing material. Picture walking into your local grocer in 1941 and seeing posters everywhere showing smiling families gathered around steaming pies. The newspapers printed variations weekly, with headlines like "Victory Dinner for the Whole Family." Government propaganda made this sound like a gourmet feast. Housewives traded recipes at air raid shelters, whispering tips like "add extra salt to hide the turnip taste." The ingredients list reads like a compost bin inventory. Potatoes, cauliflower, swedes, carrots, and whatever other vegetables you could scrape together, all mixed with oatmeal and baked under a pastry crust made from national flour. That's flour mixed with chalk and potato starch, by the way. The whole thing was then smothered in gravy made from vegetable water and browning sauce, because even the British couldn't pretend this tasted good without serious help. But here's the plot twist that nobody talks about. Many people found Woolton Pie quite unpalatable, despite the cheerful propaganda. Families had been politely choking it down for years, smiling and nodding when the government asked how they liked their patriotic vegetables. The moment real food came back, Woolton Pie quietly disappeared from cookbooks. It's like if someone took your compost bin, added flour, and called it dinner. And nobody batted an eye because the Minister of Food said it was delicious. Number 2. Carrot Fudge. The government convinced people that boiled carrots mixed with artificial sweetener could replace chocolate candy. Let that sink in for a moment. Recipe. Books from 1942 seriously instructed families to mash carrots with saccharin and gelatin, then cut it into squares and serve as luxury sweets. Can you imagine handing this to a kid and watching their face? The propaganda campaign was incredible. Dr. Carrot became a national mascot, with cartoon carrots dancing in newspaper ads, promising that this orange mush would satisfy sweet cravings during sugar rationing. Mothers lined up at community centers to learn the proper technique for turning root vegetables into candy. The recipe called for boiling carrots until they were completely soft, mashing them smooth, adding whatever artificial sweetener could be found, mixing in unflavored gelatin, and pressing the mixture into molds to set. The texture was described in one 1943 housekeeping magazine as delightfully chewy, with a natural sweetness that children adore. But here's what really happened. Children were not particularly enthusiastic about Carrot Fudge. The stuff was widely disliked and gradually disappeared from recipe collections. It's like giving a kid a carrot stick and insisting it's a Snickers bar. The amazing thing is that adults convinced themselves this was working. Imagine serving mashed vegetables and calling it dessert, then wondering why nobody wants seconds. Number 3. Chocolate substitutes. Step into a 1943 kitchen where mothers are creating chocolate substitutes from unusual ingredients. These chocolate alternatives were made from various starches: cocoa powder substitute, which was often ground acorns, and whatever sweetener could be scrounged up. The process involved using available starches, mixing them with roasted acorn powder, and adding saccharin to create something that looked vaguely brown. Real chocolate was reserved for troops overseas, so home-front families desperately tried to recreate chocolate using alternative ingredients. Advertisements in women's magazines showed elegant ladies serving chocolate substitutes to impressed guests, with headlines like "Wartime Luxury from Your Victory Garden." The recipe appeared in government pamphlets alongside instructions for growing ingredients specifically for chocolate making. Families would gather around the kitchen table, watching mother carefully measure starches and acorn powder, convinced they were about to taste something magical. The mixture was heated, molded into bars, and served with the same ceremony as real chocolate. Children were told it was just as good as the real thing, maybe even better, because it was made with love and patriotism. But these substitutes were generally unsatisfactory. They had an unusual taste that was quite different from real chocolate. The moment real chocolate returned to stores, these substitutes vanished completely. It's like making a smoothie out of houseplants and wondering why it doesn't taste like fruit. The fact that entire families convinced themselves this was edible chocolate shows just how desperate things had become. Number 4. Ersatz coffee. Families thought they were maintaining their morning coffee ritual with this substitute, but they were actually drinking liquid made from alternative ingredients. Made from roasted acorns, chicory, and sometimes other fillers, this coffee had 0 actual coffee beans and tasted exactly like you'd expect tree-based beverages to taste. Coffee shops proudly advertised Victory Coffee and Patriot Brew, with customers lining up for cups of what was essentially hot water filtered through alternative ingredients. The process involved gathering acorns, roasting them until they were dark brown, grinding them with chicory root, and brewing the mixture like regular coffee. Some manufacturers added various fillers to bulk up the product and make it look more like ground coffee. Picture walking into your neighborhood diner in 1943 and ordering your usual morning coffee. The waitress brings you a steaming cup of brown liquid that smells vaguely like a campfire. You take a sip and taste wood, bitterness, and regret. But you smile and nod because this is your patriotic duty. These coffee substitutes were generally of poor quality and disappeared rapidly after the war. It's like paying Starbucks prices for hot water filtered through mulch. The fact that people lined up for this every morning shows how powerful the need for familiar rituals can be, even when those rituals taste like tree bark. Number 5. Mock goose. This festive roast contained absolutely no goose, no poultry, and barely qualified as food. The recipe called for lentils, breadcrumbs, and sage stuffed into a loaf shape, then covered with gravy made from vegetable water and browning sauce. Christmas 1942. Advertisements actually promoted this as a traditional holiday centerpiece, with families carving it ceremoniously at dinner tables. Imagine Christmas morning 1943. The family gathers around the table, father sharpening the carving knife, children excited for their holiday feast. Mother proudly brings out the mock goose, a brown loaf that looks nothing like any bird that ever existed. Father begins to carve, the knife cutting through what is essentially a seasoned brick of mashed legumes. "Everyone takes their portion," says Grace, and pretends this is the Christmas dinner they've been looking forward to all year. The recipe appeared in every major cookbook of the era, with detailed instructions for shaping the lentil mixture to resemble an actual roast. Some versions included hard-boiled eggs in the center to simulate stuffing. The whole thing was basted with a mixture of margarine and browning sauce to give it a roasted appearance. But mock goose was generally considered disappointing compared to real meat. It's like serving a veggie burger and insisting it's Thanksgiving turkey. The disconnect between the elaborate presentation and the actual taste was so jarring that families still talked about it decades later. Number 6. Nettle soup. Picture families foraging in parks and vacant lots, gathering weeds for dinner. Government pamphlets seriously instructed citizens to harvest stinging nettles and boil them into soup, claiming they were nature's vitamin tablets. The hedgerow harvest campaigns had people competing to find the most creative weed recipes, with nettle soup winning local cooking contests. The process involved wearing gloves to gather young nettle leaves, washing them carefully, and boiling them with whatever vegetables could be found. The nettles lost their sting when cooked, but they also lost most of their flavor, creating a green, watery soup that tasted like boiled grass. Families would venture out on weekends with baskets and scissors, turning parks into foraging grounds. Community centers held classes on identifying edible weeds, with nettle soup demonstrations drawing crowds of eager housewives. The soup was promoted as being rich in vitamins and minerals, a natural health tonic that would keep families strong during wartime shortages. Recipe variations included adding potatoes for thickness or wild onions for flavor. But foraging carried risks when people couldn't properly identify plants. The nettle soup movement declined as people became more cautious about wild plants. It's like if the government told you to make salad from your lawn weeds. The fact that people were so desperate for vegetables that they turned to park weeds shows just how limited food options had become. Number 7. National loaf. The government created a standard bread that every bakery had to make exactly the same way. This gray, dense loaf was made from whole wheat flour mixed with chalk, potato flour, and sometimes other fillers to bulk it up. Bakeries were legally required to sell only national loaf, with signs proudly declaring nutritious national bread, the patriotic choice. Imagine walking into your local bakery in 1942 and finding only one type of bread available. The familiar white loaves are gone, replaced by dense gray bricks that feel heavy in your hands. The baker explains that this is the new national loaf, scientifically designed to provide maximum nutrition with minimum ingredients. You buy a loaf and take it home, only to discover that it's so dense it could be used as a doorstop. The recipe was mandated by the Ministry of Food and included calcium carbonate, which is chalk, to add calcium and bulk up the flour. Potato flour was added to stretch the wheat, and some manufacturers included approved fillers. The bread was supposed to be more nutritious than white bread, but it was also quite unpalatable. Consumer complaints were common, with many people finding the bread barely edible. The recipe was modified several times before being eventually abandoned after the war. It's like if the government mandated that all restaurants serve the same flavorless sandwich. The national loaf became a symbol of wartime deprivation that people were eager to forget. Number 8. Victory cake. This celebration cake was made without eggs, butter, or sugar, basically the three things that make cake edible. The recipe used mashed potatoes as the base, with grated carrots for sweetness and vinegar to make it rise. Birthday parties and weddings featured these gray, dense cakes with families singing happy birthday over what looked like a failed science experiment. Picture a child's birthday party in 1943. The family has saved their rations for weeks to make this special cake. Mother brings out a flat, gray rectangle that barely resembles cake, decorated with a thin layer of mock cream made from margarine and powdered milk. The birthday child blows out candles stuck into what is essentially a sweet potato loaf, while everyone pretends this is a proper celebration. The recipe appeared in every wartime cookbook, with variations that included beets for color or turnips for texture. Some versions used honey if it could be found, but most relied on mashed fruit or vegetables for any sweetness. The vinegar was supposed to react with baking soda to create lift, but the heavy vegetables usually prevented any real rising. Victory cake was generally unpopular, especially with children who found it quite different from real cake. It's like celebrating with a birthday potato and wondering why nobody's excited. The fact that families went through the motions of celebration with these unusual cakes shows how important maintaining traditions was, even when the traditions became quite different. Number 9. Mock Christmas pudding. Christmas 1943 saw families gathering around puddings that contained no fruit, no brandy, and no joy. Made from grated carrots, breadcrumbs, and whatever spices could be found, then steamed into a dense orange brick. Department stores actually sold Christmas pudding mix that was just vegetables and flour, with advertisements showing happy families enjoying traditional holiday flavors. The traditional Christmas pudding was loaded with dried fruits, nuts, brandy, and suet, all of which were either rationed or completely unavailable. The mock version substituted grated carrots and turnips for fruit, breadcrumbs for suet, and water for brandy. The mixture was steamed for hours in cloth bags, creating a dense, vegetable-flavored mass that bore no resemblance to actual pudding. Families would gather for the traditional pudding ceremony, with father ceremoniously cutting into what looked like an orange meatloaf. Children searched for the traditional silver coins that were supposed to bring luck, but even the coins couldn't make this edible. Some recipes included mock brandy sauce made from cornstarch and artificial flavoring. Post-war Christmas cookbook sales increased as families wanted to return to traditional recipes. It's like serving vegetable loaf and calling it Christmas dinner. The mock Christmas pudding became a symbol of wartime deprivation that many families were eager to move past. Number 10. Turnip jam. Families thought they were preserving fruit for winter when they made this jam, but they were actually spreading mashed turnips on their bread. Made from boiled turnips mashed with saccharin and food coloring, then jarred like actual preserves. Canning clubs displayed jars of turnip jam at county fairs, with judges awarding ribbons for creative preservation techniques. The process involved boiling turnips until they were completely soft, mashing them smooth, adding artificial sweetener and red food coloring to make it look like strawberry jam, then canning it in sterilized jars. The result was a sweet, vegetable-flavored spread that looked like jam, but tasted like sweetened baby food. Community canning groups held competitions for the best turnip jam, with recipes that included lemon extract for tartness or artificial fruit flavoring to mask the turnip taste. Families would line their pantry shelves with these jars, proudly showing off their preserved goods to neighbors. Children were told it was just as good as real jam, maybe even better because it was made from their own victory garden. Turnip jam was generally unpopular and provided limited nutritional value. The jam quietly disappeared from recipe collections after the war. It's like putting mashed vegetables on toast and calling it breakfast. The fact that people convinced themselves this was jam shows how desperately they wanted to maintain normal food traditions. Number 11. Lentil roast. This Sunday roast was carved and served exactly like beef, except it was 100% legumes. Families would ceremoniously carve slices from a loaf made of mashed lentils, breadcrumbs, and herbs, serving it with gravy, and acting like it was prime rib. Butcher shops actually sold lentil roast mix, with instructions for shaping and cooking, advertising it as protein-rich family dining. Picture Sunday dinner. 1943. Father stands at the head of the table with the carving knife, preparing to slice the family roast. But instead of beef or lamb, he's carving a brown loaf made from mashed lentils and breadcrumbs. The family passes around slices of what is essentially a seasoned bean cake, covering it with gravy made from vegetable water and pretending it's their traditional Sunday feast. The recipe involved soaking lentils overnight, cooking them until soft, mashing them with breadcrumbs, herbs, and whatever vegetables were available, then shaping the mixture into a loaf and baking it until firm. Some versions included hard-boiled eggs in the center to make it more festive. The whole thing was served with ceremony, carved at the table like a real roast. Post-war meat. Availability made lentil roast quickly obsolete, with most recipes quietly removed from cookbooks. Families who had spent years eating their Sunday lentil loaf were eager to return to real meat once it became available again. It's like serving a bean casserole and insisting it's steak dinner. The elaborate presentation couldn't hide the fact that this was just mashed legumes shaped like meat. Number 12. Unusual sausages. Picture butcher shops in 1943 displaying sausages that contained unusual fillers. These sausages were made from whatever meat scraps could be found, mixed with various fillers, oatmeal, and enough seasoning to hide unusual tastes. Butchers advertised victory sausages and wartime bangers, with customers lining up for links that were quite different from peacetime sausages. The sausages contained whatever meat could be obtained, often organ meats and scraps that would normally be less desirable, mixed with various fillers to bulk up the product. Oatmeal and breadcrumbs were also added to stretch the meat, along with heavy seasoning to mask the unusual texture and taste. Families would fry these sausages for breakfast, watching them sizzle in the pan and release an aroma that was quite different from peacetime sausages. Children were told they were getting protein and vitamins, while parents convinced themselves that any meat was better than no meat. The sausages had an unusual texture and taste that people learned to tolerate. Food quality during wartime was generally poor, and these sausages were no exception. It's like eating sausages made from questionable ingredients. The fact that people lined up to buy sausages they knew contained unusual fillers shows how desperate the meat shortage had become. Number 13. Fish paste. Families thought they were getting protein-rich spreads for their bread, but this fish paste was made from fish processing byproducts, ground up with flour and salt, creating a gray paste that was quite unpalatable. Grocery stores promoted fish paste as ocean nutrition in a jar, with families spreading it on bread for lunch and dinner. The paste was made from fish processing waste that would normally be less desirable. Various fish parts were ground up with salt and flour to create a spreadable paste. The mixture was then canned and sold as a protein supplement for families struggling with meat rationing. The texture was gritty, and the taste was overwhelmingly fishy, with an unpleasant aftertaste. Families would spread thin layers on bread, often covering it with whatever vegetables they had to mask the flavor. Children were told it was good for their brains and would help them grow strong. Fish paste was generally of poor quality and disappeared after the war when better options became available. It's like eating low-quality fish spread and calling it a gourmet sandwich filling. The fact that families spread fish paste on bread and called it lunch shows how limited protein options had become. Number 14. Acorn flour bread. Families were literally baking bread from nuts they gathered off the bay, ground in parks. Government pamphlets instructed citizens to collect acorns, grind them into flour, and use it to make bread that had an unusual, bitter taste. Forage for Victory campaigns had entire neighborhoods competing to gather the most acorns, with community kitchens teaching acorn processing techniques. The process involved collecting acorns from oak trees, removing the shells, grinding the nuts into flour, and leaching out the bitter tannins by soaking the flour in multiple changes of water. The resulting flour was then mixed with whatever other flour was available to make bread. The bread had a dense texture and a distinctly nutty, bitter flavor that took getting used to. Families would spend weekends in parks and wooded areas, competing with squirrels for the best acorns. Community centers held classes on proper acorn processing, with demonstrations on grinding techniques and tannin removal. The bread was promoted as being rich in nutrients and a good source of carbohydrates when wheat flour was scarce. Acorn processing was extremely labor-intensive, and the results were often unsatisfactory. Many people found the process too difficult, and the bread unpalatable. It's like making dinner from foraged nuts and wondering why it tastes unusual. The acorn bread experiment showed how far people were willing to go to find alternative food sources. Number 15. Dried egg dishes. Step into a 1943 breakfast where mothers are whisking yellow powder into something resembling eggs. These eggs were made from powdered egg substitute that turned into rubbery, artificial-tasting discs when cooked. Breakfast diners served egg substitute dishes, with customers accepting them as necessary wartime substitutes. The dried eggs came in tins or packets and had to be reconstituted with water before cooking. The powder was often lumpy and didn't mix well, creating dishes with a grainy texture and an artificial taste. The eggs would turn bright yellow when cooked, but the color was the only thing that resembled real eggs. Families would gather for breakfast, watching mother carefully measure the powder and water, whisking it into a paste that looked vaguely egg-like. The mixture was then cooked in whatever fat was available, creating flat, rubbery discs that were served with forced enthusiasm. Children were told they were getting the same nutrition as real eggs. Post-war availability of fresh eggs made dried egg products quickly obsolete. Families who had spent years eating powdered eggs were eager to return to fresh eggs once they became available. The dried eggs had an artificial taste and smell that people associated with wartime deprivation. It's like eating artificial eggs and calling it breakfast. The dried egg dishes became a symbol of wartime substitutes. Number 16. Vegetable marrow curry. Families thought they were enjoying exotic international cuisine with this curry, but it was made from oversized zucchini-like vegetables boiled with curry powder and water, creating a mushy, bland dish that bore little resemblance to actual curry. Restaurants advertised wartime curry dishes, with diners accepting these vegetable-based versions as necessary substitutes. The vegetable marrow was a large, bland squash that grew easily in victory gardens, but had very little flavor. The curry was made by boiling chunks of marrow with whatever curry powder could be found, usually a weak mixture of turmeric and other spices. The result was a watery, yellow soup with floating pieces of flavorless vegetable. Families would gather around bowls of this curry, convinced they were experiencing exotic flavors. The curry powder was often stale or of poor quality, providing color but little actual spice. Some recipes included potatoes or other vegetables to bulk up the dish, but the marrow remained the main ingredient. Post-war exposure to actual international cuisine revealed how different these curries were from authentic versions. People who had never tasted real curry had nothing to compare it to, so they accepted the vegetable soup as authentic. Once real international restaurants became more common, the vegetable marrow version became an outdated memory. It's like serving boiled vegetables and calling it authentic ethnic cuisine. The fake curry showed how isolated people were from actual international foods. Number 17. Starch-based noodles. These noodles were made from alternative starches and contained little or no actual pasta ingredients. Families would boil these substitutes into noodle shapes that often didn't hold together well when cooked. Italian restaurants served substitute pasta made from various starches, with customers accepting them as wartime necessities. The noodles were made by mixing alternative starches with water to form a dough, then rolling it thin and cutting it into strips. The strips were supposed to hold their shape when cooked, but the alternative ingredients couldn't maintain the structure of real pasta. The noodles would often fall apart when cooked, creating a starchy, unappetizing mess. Families would carefully prepare their substitute noodles, boiling water and adding the strips with hope that this time they would hold together. Instead, they would often watch their noodles disintegrate into a thick, starchy soup. Some recipes suggested adding other ingredients to help bind the noodles, but even that couldn't prevent problems. The poor quality and texture of substitute noodles made them unpopular, and they were quickly abandoned after the war. People who had grown up eating real pasta couldn't accept the poor substitutes. It's like paying for spaghetti and getting served starchy water with a fork. The substitute noodle experiment showed that some foods simply can't be successfully replaced. Number 18. Cabbage water soup. Picture soup kitchens in 1943 serving bowls of liquid that was literally just cabbage-flavored water. This soup was made from boiling cabbage leaves in water, then serving the cooking liquid with maybe some salt if you were lucky. Restaurants listed vegetable broth on menus, serving customers what was essentially flavored water. The soup was made by boiling cabbage leaves until they were completely soft, then straining out the vegetables and serving the cooking water as soup. Sometimes the cabbage was left in, creating a thin broth with floating pieces of overcooked vegetable. The result was a watery, slightly bitter liquid that provided little nutrition or satisfaction. Families would gather around bowls of this soup, trying to convince themselves it was nourishing and filling. The soup was often the first course of a meal that didn't have much of a second course. Children would sip the watery broth and ask for more, not because it tasted good, but because they were still hungry. Cabbage water provided very little nutritional value or satisfaction. The soup was essentially flavored water that took up space in the stomach without providing real sustenance. It's like paying restaurant prices for the water used to wash vegetables. The cabbage water soup represented the most basic level of wartime cuisine, when even cooking water was considered food. Number 19. Vegetable-based candy. Children thought they were getting real candy when parents handed them these sweets, but they were made from various vegetables mashed with artificial coloring. These candies had an earthy vegetable flavor that was quite different from real candy. Candy shops sold substitute sweets made from vegetables, with children accepting them as wartime treats. The candy was made by boiling various root vegetables until they were soft, mashing them smooth, adding artificial coloring to make them look like real candy, and forming them into shapes. The vegetables provided some natural sweetness, but they also had an earthy flavor that no amount of coloring could hide. Children would receive these candies as special treats, unwrapping them with excitement only to discover they tasted quite different from real candy. Some kids would trade them away immediately, while others would try to convince themselves they were delicious. Parents would watch their children's reactions and feel disappointed about not being able to provide real candy. Post-war candy availability revealed how different vegetable candy was from real sweets. Children who had grown up during the war often had mixed feelings about certain vegetables afterward, associating them with disappointing substitute candy. It's like giving kids vegetables and insisting they're dessert. The vegetable candy showed how desperately parents wanted to give their children normal treats, even when normal was impossible. Number 20. Mock turtle soup. This soup contained no turtle and barely resembled the luxury dish it was named after. Made from calf's head, vegetables, and whatever scraps could be found, then heavily spiced to mask unusual flavors. Restaurants served mock turtle as their signature dish, with diners accepting it as a wartime substitute for more expensive ingredients. The soup was made from calf's head, which was one of the few meat products still available, boiled with vegetables and spices to create a thick, gelatinous broth. The head provided gelatin and some meat, but the flavor was strong and unusual. Heavy spicing was used to mask the taste and make it seem more palatable than it actually was. Restaurants would serve this soup as a special dish, presenting it with ceremony and charging reasonable prices for what was essentially a soup made from less desirable cuts. Diners would order it thinking they were getting something special, only to discover it had an unusual taste. Post-war dining standards made mock turtle soup seem outdated and unappealing. People who had accepted it during wartime realized they had been eating soup made from unusual ingredients. It's like serving unusual cuts and calling it fine dining. The mock turtle soup represented wartime dining, where restaurants had to make do with whatever ingredients were available. So there you have it. 20 rationing recipes so unusual they were essentially abandoned once better options returned. Can you imagine sitting down to a dinner of unusual sausage, chocolate substitutes, and cabbage water soup, then telling your family it was delicious? Here's the crazy part. People didn't just tolerate these foods, they convinced themselves they were patriotic masterpieces. The real lesson here isn't just about unusual food, it's about how desperation can make us accept the unacceptable, and how quickly we forget our worst mistakes once better options return. Every time you complain about airplane food or cafeteria lunch, remember that your great-grandparents were eating unusual substitutes and calling them normal meals. And nobody batted an eye. These recipes weren't just unusual food. They were symbols of a time when normal life was suspended, and people had to convince themselves that poor substitutes were acceptable. The most amazing thing about these wartime foods isn't how unusual they were, it's how quickly they disappeared once the war ended. Families who had spent years perfecting their turnip jam recipes suddenly couldn't remember why they had ever thought vegetables made good candy. Restaurants that had served mock turtle soup quietly removed it from their menus and moved on to better ingredients. But these foods also show the incredible resilience of the human spirit. Faced with shortages and rationing, people didn't just give up and starve. They got creative. They adapted. They found ways to make meals out of whatever was available. They turned alternative ingredients into sausage, vegetables into candy, and tree-based ingredients into coffee. It wasn't good, but it kept them alive. The legacy of these wartime foods lives on in our modern food safety regulations, our nutrition labels, and our expectations of what food should taste like. Every FDA approval, every ingredient list, every warning about artificial additives exists because people in the 1940s ate things that were of questionable quality and called them dinner. If this video made you grateful for modern food safety standards, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories from history's strangest chapters. Because trust me, rationing food was just the beginning of humanity's questionable decisions. The next time you open your refrigerator and complain that there's nothing to eat, remember the families who made Christmas dinner out of mashed turnips and considered themselves lucky to have it.